Ambassador Park Min-ho adjusted his collar one final time as the transport shuttle approached the massive Galactic Council station. Through the viewport, he watched the enormous structure grow larger, its crystalline spires twisting into impossible geometric patterns that hurt human eyes to follow. Dozens of alien vessels docked at various ports, their designs ranging from sleek metallic crescents to organic-looking pods that pulsed with bioluminescent veins. "First time seeing it in person?" asked Captain Han So-young from the pilot's seat. Her knuckles were white against the control yoke, though she tried to hide her nervousness behind casual conversation. "Pictures don't do it justice," Min-ho replied, watching a kilometer-long Tritari vessel drift past like a golden whale. "Hard to believe we're actually here." The docking process took 20 minutes of careful maneuvering through traffic control, systems designed for species that had been traveling between stars for millennia. Earth's shuttle looked primitive compared to the vessels around them, its chemical rockets and metal hull standing out among ships that seemed to bend space itself for propulsion. As the airlock cycled open, Min-ho felt the artificial gravity shift slightly. The station's atmospheric processes had been adjusted to accommodate dozens of different species, creating a strange mixture of sense and pressure that made his ears pop. His diplomatic credentials hung heavy on his chest, each symbol representing years of preparation and humanity's desperate hope for peaceful integration into galactic society. The corridor beyond stretched for hundreds of meters, its walls made of some translucent material that showed the star field beyond. Alien beings moved through the space with practiced ease. Floating jellyfish-like creatures pulsed overhead, their tentacles trailing streams of colored gases. Mechanical beings that might have been robots or cybernetic organisms clanked along designated pathways, their optical sensors sweeping constantly. But it was the reactions to his presence that Min-ho noticed most. A group of reptilian Vex delegates turned as he passed, their forked tongues tasting the air before they hissed dismissively to each other in their clicking language. Their scales rippled with patterns that he had learned, indicated amusement mixed with contempt. One of them, wearing elaborate crystalline ornaments that marked him as high-ranking, made a sound that universal translators rendered as laughter. "Look," the Vex delegate said to his companions, his voice carrying clearly through the corridor's acoustics. "The primitives actually sent someone in person. Did they think we would be impressed by their chemical-burning ships?" Near the main chamber entrance, a cluster of insectoid cleth clicked their mandibles in what Min-ho recognized as mockery. Their compound eyes tracked his movement with predatory focus, while their forearms gestured in patterns that needed no translation. One of them actually stepped into his path, forcing him to walk around, while chittering sounds that might have been laughter echoed from their throat sacs. The main council chamber was a marvel of engineering that could accommodate hundreds of different atmospheric requirements simultaneously. Floating platforms held delegates from aquatic species in bubbles of their home water, while others sat in specialized environmental suits or behind energy barriers that maintained their preferred temperature and pressure. The air itself seemed to shimmer with different atmospheric pockets, creating a rainbow effect across the vast domed ceiling. Min-ho took his place at the podium designated for Earth's representative, a small platform that seemed almost comically isolated compared to the elaborate seating arrangements of established galactic powers. His prepared speech felt inadequate as he looked out at the assembled beings, many of whom had civilizations that spanned multiple star systems, while humanity was still learning to leave their own solar system reliably. "Honored delegates of the Galactic Council," he began, his voice amplified by translation systems that would convert his words into hundreds of different communication methods. "I come before you today not as a conqueror or supplicant, but as a representative of humanity's sincere desire for peaceful cooperation and mutual understanding." The chamber erupted in sounds that ranged from mechanical buzzing to organic roars. Some delegates turned away entirely, while others made gestures that clearly indicated dismissal. A massive creature that resembled a living mountain of crystalline formations actually began to move toward the exits, its footsteps sending vibrations through the floor. Min-ho pressed on, raising his voice above the commotion. "We offer our unique perspectives, our scientific innovations, and our commitment to the principles of peaceful coexistence that this council represents. Earth may be young in galactic terms, but we bring fresh ideas and an eagerness to contribute to the greater community of intelligent life. That was when the chamber doors exploded inward. 3 figures in black combat armor burst through the wreckage, their weapons already charged and targeting. Minho had a split second to register the hegemony insignias on their shoulders before energy bolts filled the air around him. Security drones began deploying from the walls, but the attackers had clearly planned their timing perfectly. The first bolt caught him in the shoulder, spinning him around. The second pierced his chest, sending him to his knees. As his vision blurred and the taste of copper filled his mouth, Minho saw the alien delegates not fleeing in panic, but watching with what could only be described as satisfaction. With his last breath, he managed to speak into his communication device, knowing the words would travel instantly back to Earth through quantum entanglement transmitters. "Tell them," he gasped, blood speckling the crystalline floor beneath him. "We tried peace first." The transmission cut to black as his lifeless eyes stared up at the domed ceiling, while alien delegates nodded approval at the message they had just sent to humanity. The Galactic Council chamber had been repaired since the assassination, its crystalline walls gleaming as if nothing had happened. Representatives from dozens of species filled their designated areas, chattering among themselves about trade agreements and territorial disputes. The Vex delegates preened their scales while the Cleth clicked their mandibles in satisfied rhythms. 3 days had passed since they had sent their message to the primitive humans, and not a single response had come through official channels. That changed when every display screen in the chamber suddenly flickered to life. Admiral Kim Daeho's face appeared across hundreds of monitors simultaneously, his weathered features stern as carved stone. The communication signal bypassed every security protocol the Council had in place, streaming directly through their quantum networks, with a clarity that made many delegates step back in surprise. Behind the Admiral, through the viewport of what appeared to be a command bridge, Earth hung like a blue jewel against the starfield, but it wasn't alone. Dark shapes moved in the space around humanity's homeworld, their forms becoming clearer as automated cameras panned across the scene. Warships. Hundreds of them. No, thousands. They emerged from the shadow of asteroids, uncloaked from behind Earth's moon, and rose from positions throughout the outer solar system where they had waited in perfect silence. The vessels looked crude by galactic standards. Angular, metal hulls with primitive chemical thrusters, bristling with kinetic weapons and missile pods instead of elegant energy cannons. Their design spoke of a species that had learned warfare through necessity rather than artistry, ships built to survive rather than impress. But their sheer numbers made the Cleth delegates stop clicking their mandibles, and even the arrogant. Vex grew silent. 72 hours ago, Admiral Daeho began, his voice transmitted simultaneously through every communication device on the station. "You murdered our ambassador." His words carried across species barriers, translated into clicking sounds for the Cleth, harmonic frequencies for the crystalline beings, and electromagnetic pulses for the mechanical delegates. The massive hegemony representative, a being that resembled a living mountain of metallic scales, shifted uncomfortably in his reinforced seating area. Around him, his fellow delegates exchanged glances that their primitive visual organs probably couldn't even detect, but their body language spoke volumes. "Ambassador Park Minho came to you with open hands," Daeho continued, and the cameras behind him shifted to show more of the human fleet. Carrier vessels the size of city blocks began launching smaller craft, while destroyer squadrons formed attack formations with precision that spoke of countless hours of drill and preparation. He offered friendship, cooperation, and the chance for peaceful coexistence between our species and yours. A Tritari delegate, her golden skin shimmering with nervous energy, whispered to her aide, "How many ships do they have?" The aide's multiple eyes were fixed on the screens, rapidly calculating, before responding with a series of harmonic tones that roughly translated to "too many to count." You answered his peaceful gesture with violence. The Admiral's voice grew, harder, and now the cameras showed human crews moving through their ships with practiced efficiency. Men and women who looked no different from the murdered ambassador, except for the cold determination in their eyes and the way they handled. Their weapons like extensions of their own bodies. In the command centers of the human vessels, officers wearing simple uniforms studied holographic displays showing every major population center in hegemony space. Captain Lee Jae-won stood before a tactical display aboard the destroyer Seoul's Pride, watching as targeting data streamed across her screens. Around her, crew members who had trained their entire adult lives for this moment checked weapon systems and reviewed battle plans that had been refined through decades of theoretical warfare. "The humans can't be serious," hissed a vexed delegate, his forked tongue tasting the air nervously. "Look at those primitive vessels. Our energy shields alone would—" His words died as the display showed human fighters conducting training maneuvers around their capital ships. The small craft moved in patterns that defied conventional space combat doctrine, performing coordinated attacks that treated three-dimensional space like a hunting ground. Each pilot flew with a recklessness that spoke of a species that had learned warfare against its own kind, where victory went not to the most advanced technology, but to those willing to make the greatest sacrifices. Admiral Daeho's image leaned forward slightly, his eyes seeming to look directly at each delegate individually. "Now you will learn why humanity has never lost a war that mattered to us." Behind him, the human fleet began to move, thousands of ships transitioning from defensive positions to attack formations that spread across the solar system like a three-dimensional web. The Cleth delegates finally broke their silence, chittering anxiously among themselves. Their compound eyes had evolved to track multiple threats simultaneously, and what they saw in the human fleet movements triggered every predator avoidance instinct their species possessed. These weren't the actions of a primitive civilization making empty threats. This was a coordinated military response that had been planned and prepared for years. Aboard the human vessels, crews who had studied every major conflict in their species, bloody history made final preparations. Veterans of Earth's wars who understood that sometimes peace could only be achieved through the complete defeat of those who refused to respect it. Officers who had analyzed the tactics of Napoleon, the strategies of ancient generals, and the innovations of modern warfare, all adapted for combat in the void between stars. The mechanical delegates processed the data streams from their sensors, their artificial intelligences calculating probability matrices that all reached the same conclusion. The humans hadn't just built a fleet in secret. They had built a war machine designed specifically for the type of conflict they now faced. Every ship placement, every squadron formation, every tactical decision spoke of a species that treated warfare not as a tool of last resort, but as an art form they had perfected through millennia of fighting each other. "How you have made your choice," Admiral Daeho concluded, his weathered face showing no emotion as launch bays opened across the human fleet and fighters began pouring into space like angry insects. "Ambassador Park offered you peace. You chose war. Now you will discover why apex predators should never be provoked." The transmission ended, leaving the council chamber in stunned silence as thousands of human warships began their burn toward the hyperspace jump points that would carry them to every corner of hegemony space. The delegates who had laughed at humanity's primitive technology now found themselves calculating whether their own defenses could withstand an assault from beings who had turned warfare into both science and religion. Led by crews who understood that sometimes the galaxy needed to be reminded that the most dangerous predators often came from the most unexpected places. Captain Lee Ji-won gripped the command chair of her destroyer as hyperspace dissolved around her fleet. 3 hegemony worlds appeared on the tactical display, their orbital rings glittering like jewelry around gas giants and terrestrial planets. Massive space stations rotated slowly in perfect formation, while hundreds of civilian and military vessels moved between them in organized traffic patterns that had remained unchanged for centuries. "All ships, this is Sword Leader," Ji-won spoke into her communicator, her voice reaching the captains of 47 human vessels that had emerged from hyperspace in perfect synchronization. "Remember the mission parameters. We are not targeting planetary populations. Our job is to cut these worlds off from the galactic community until they understand the price of murdering diplomats." Through her viewport, She could see the enemy, scrambling to respond. Hegemony defense platforms were powering up their energy shields, creating shimmering barriers around critical installations. Their warships, sleek vessels that looked like living creatures made of metal and crystal, began forming defensive formations that their tactical computers had calculated thousands of times before. But they had never calculated against humanity. Lieutenant. Commander Park Yuna called out from the weapons station. Enemy cruiser squadron approaching from bearing 270. 8 vessels heavy class. Their energy weapons are charging. Launch all fighters, Jiwon ordered. And remember what Admiral Daeho told us? We don't need to match their technology. We just need to be willing to do what they won't. The launch. Bays of every human ship opened simultaneously, releasing clouds of single-seat fighters that immediately spread across the battlefield like a three-dimensional storm. Each pilot had trained since childhood for this moment, flying simulations. Based on every known alien ship design and defensive pattern, they moved in coordinated groups that confused enemy targeting systems, designed to track more predictable attack formations. Lieutenant Kim Min-soo's fighter screamed toward the nearest hegemony station, his wingmen following in a formation that looked chaotic to alien eyes, but was actually a carefully planned assault pattern. The station's defense turrets tracked them with energy weapons that could vaporize his fighter with a single hit. But Min-soo had studied the timing patterns of similar weapon systems in training simulators for years. Sword 3 to all fighters. He called over the communication channel. Remember the soul maneuver. Hit fast, hit hard, and make them think there are twice as many of us as there really are. His fighter dove toward the station's docking bay, missiles streaming from his weapon pods, toward the critical support structures that kept the orbital facility in position. Behind him, his wingmen targeted different sections of the same structure, their attacks timed to hit within seconds of each other. The hegemony engineers had built their stations to withstand single massive attacks, not coordinated strikes that targeted multiple weak points simultaneously. The station's shields flared and collapsed as the missile impacts cascaded through its support systems. Without its protective barriers, the facility was vulnerable to follow-up attacks from human destroyers whose kinetic weapons had been designed specifically for this type of target. Captain Jiwon watched as similar scenes played out across all 3 worlds. Her tactical display showed human strike groups engaging enemy vessels with a ferocity that surprised even the alien commanders who had studied their species. When a hegemony cruiser managed to destroy one of her destroyers with a concentrated energy barrage, 2 human vessels immediately moved to flank it, their crews willing to risk everything to ensure their fallen comrades were avenged. Enemy flagship is trying to establish communication, reported Communications Officer Lee So-yun. They're requesting terms for surrender. Tell them, Jiwon replied, watching as another orbital shipyard erupted in flames, that they should have thought about surrender before they murdered Ambassador Park. Today is not about negotiation. Today is about consequences. The battle raged for 6 hours, but the outcome was never in doubt. The hegemony forces had superior individual ships, better energy shields, and weapons that could punch through human armor with ease. But they had never faced an enemy that treated every engagement as a learning experience, where each destroyed ship transmitted its tactical data to the surviving vessels before its crew died. Commander Oh Kyung-soo leading a squadron of human cruisers against a hegemony battle group demonstrated the difference in tactical thinking when his damaged vessel began to lose structural integrity. Instead of retreating or surrendering, he ordered his crew to evacuate to the escape pods, while he piloted the dying ship directly into the enemy formation, using its reactor as a weapon that took 3 alien vessels with it. The surviving human ships immediately adapted his tactic, with crews volunteering for similar missions when their vessels became too damaged to continue fighting effectively. The hegemony commanders, watching their carefully organized formations being disrupted by enemies willing to use their own ships as weapons, began to understand that they were fighting a species that viewed warfare fundamentally differently than they did. By the end of the day, all 3 hegemony worlds found themselves isolated from the galactic community. Their orbital infrastructure lay in ruins, burning debris creating artificial meteor showers that lit up their night skies. Every communication satellite had been destroyed, every hyperspace beacon disabled, every connection to the wider galaxy severed. The planetary populations, watching from their surfaces as their lifelines to the stars burned overhead, found their emergency broadcast systems hijacked by human transmission equipment. Ambassador Park Min-ho's final words echoed from every speaker on every world, his voice repeating endlessly, "Tell them we tried peace first." Captain Jiwon stood on her bridge, looking out at the debris field that had once been the pride of hegemony, engineering. Around her, exhausted crew members were already analyzing the battle data, preparing reports that would help other human fleets improve their tactics for the engagements to come. "For Ambassador Park," she whispered, as her fleet prepared to jump to hyperspace and carry their message of consequences to the next hegemony system. In the space around the isolated worlds, automated beacons left by the human fleet continued, broadcasting the same message to any ship that approached. These worlds chose violence over diplomacy. Let their isolation remind the galaxy that some choices have permanent consequences. Colonel Choi Hyejin walked through the corridors of what had once been Vex Prime's most secure orbital defense platform. The reptilian architecture felt alien beneath her boots, with curved walls that seemed to pulse with organic rhythms and lighting that shifted through spectrums human eyes weren't meant to process. Emergency klaxons still wailed in the distance, their alien sounds mixing with the voices of her human technicians as they worked to establish control over the station's systems. "Colonel," called out Technical Sergeant Kim Hyunwoo from behind a bank of crystalline control panels, "we've cracked their defense grid protocols. Every orbital weapon platform in the system is now under our command." His fingers moved across interfaces designed for clawed hands, adapting human ingenuity to alien technology with the same determination that had brought them this far. Through the massive viewport that dominated the command center, Hyejin could see the aftermath of their victory. Vex warships drifted as burning hulks between the gas giants' rings, their elegant curved hulls split open like broken eggs. The planet below glowed with the lights of cities, whose inhabitants were just beginning to understand that their world's protectors had fallen to a species they had dismissed as primitive only weeks ago. "Movement on long-range sensors," reported Communications Officer Park Jaemin, his voice tight with concentration. "Multiple fleets approaching from the galactic core. Looks like a dozen different species, all flying diplomatic flags." Hyejin moved to the tactical display, watching as the approaching vessels resolved into recognizable configurations. Cleth, hive ships that looked like floating cities of chitin and metal. Tritari exploration vessels, with their characteristic golden hulls that bent light around them. Even massive crystalline collective entities that were less ships than living geometric patterns, holding themselves together through pure will. "They're broadcasting on all frequencies," Jaemin continued, adjusting his headset to filter through the various alien communication methods. "The Cleth Confederation is requesting immediate ceasefire talks. The Tritari Union is offering to pay reparations for Ambassador Park's death. The Mechanical Assembly is proposing a tribunal to investigate the incident." Each species that approached represented thousands of years of galactic civilization, their technologies and diplomatic protocols refined through countless conflicts and negotiations. They came with the confidence of beings who had resolved disputes through careful mediation and calculated compromises for longer than humanity had possessed written language. Hyejin activated her quantum communicator, the device that connected her instantly to Admiral Daeho's flagship somewhere in the depths of space around Earth. "Admiral, we have incoming diplomatic vessels from multiple species. They want to negotiate." Daeho's weathered face appeared on her display screen, and behind him, she could see the command bridge of humanity's most advanced warship. Officers moved with quiet efficiency, while holographic displays showed the positions of human fleets across dozens of star systems. The Admiral's eyes held the weight of decisions that would shape the galaxy's future. "What are they offering?" he asked, though his tone suggested he already knew it wouldn't matter. "The Cleth want a ceasefire with immediate effect. The Tritari are offering financial reparations and a formal apology." Several other species are proposing various forms of mediation and arbitration. Hyejin paused, watching as more diplomatic vessels appeared on her sensors. Admiral, they seem genuinely shocked by our response. I don't think they expected us to be capable of this level of coordinated military action. Daeho's expression didn't change, but she could see him processing the tactical data streaming across his own displays. Human fleets were operating simultaneously, across 37 different star systems, each one carrying out precision strikes against military and infrastructure targets while carefully avoiding civilian casualties. It was a level of coordination that required not just advanced technology, but the kind of military discipline that came from generations of warfare. "Tell them," Daeho said, his voice carrying the authority of a species that had decided to stop, being patient that they had their chance for peace when Ambassador Park extended his hand in friendship. He came to them offering cooperation, understanding, and mutual respect. They answered with murder. Through the viewport, Hyejin watched as one of the approaching Cleth vessels began broadcasting what their translators rendered as urgent clicking patterns. The insectoid species was known for their logical approach to conflict resolution, their hive minds capable of calculating optimal outcomes with mathematical precision. But they had never encountered a species that considered some outcomes worth any cost. "Sir," interrupted Sergeant Kim from the control station, "I'm detecting massive hyperspace signatures across the galactic rim. Our deep space monitoring stations are reporting human fleet movements in sectors we haven't even announced operations in." The tactical display updated to show the true scope of humanity's response. While the galaxy's attention had been focused on the obvious targets like Vex Prime and the hegemony worlds, human fleets had been positioning themselves near every major population center, trade route, and strategic resource in known space. It wasn't just a military operation. It was a demonstration that Earth had been preparing for galactic warfare on a scale that no one had imagined possible. "The mechanical delegates from the assembly are requesting direct communication," Jamin reported, his voice reflecting the strange harmonics of the artificial being's transmission methods. "They're claiming they had no involvement in Ambassador Park's assassination and are requesting neutrality status." Admiral Daeho's image leaned forward slightly, and Hyejin could see the cold calculation in his eyes that had made him humanity's most effective military commander. "Neutrality is earned through action, not requests." They sat silent while our diplomat was murdered. They watched while alien delegates laughed at his death. Their neutrality died with Ambassador Park. Across the galaxy, similar scenes were playing. Houghton's human forces demonstrated capabilities that contradicted every assumption the alien species had made about Earth's military potential. Captain Yoon Mijin's strike group materialized in the Tritari home system, their fighters immediately beginning precision strikes against orbital facilities while broadcasting recordings of Park Min-ho's final words. Commander Lee Dong-hyun's fleet appeared simultaneously in Cleth space, systematically dismantling the defensive networks that had protected their worlds for millennia. Each human commander carried the same message, delivered with the precision of military units that had trained for this exact scenario. They weren't conquering worlds or enslaving populations. They were methodically demonstrating that humanity would no longer tolerate being dismissed, ignored, or threatened by species that mistook their diplomatic efforts for weakness. "Colonel," Admiral Daeho concluded, his image beginning to fade as he prepared to coordinate the next phase of operations, "inform the diplomatic fleets that they're welcome to observe. Let them watch as we show the galaxy what happens when you murder someone who came in peace. Maybe they'll learn something useful about the consequences of their choices." As the transmission ended, Hyejin looked out at the approaching alien vessels and realized they were about to witness something that would change galactic politics forever. Humanity had stopped asking for acceptance and started demanding respect, backed by military capabilities that transformed them from supplicants into the galaxy's newest apex predators. General Seo Jinwoo's footsteps echoed through the memorial hall as he walked past walls that bore witness to humanity's transformation. From hopeful diplomats to galactic peacekeepers, the reconstructed Galactic Council station stretched around him. its architecture now incorporating human design elements alongside the crystalline spires and organic curves of alien engineering. Where once the station had been built to accommodate existing galactic powers, it now reflected the reality of a new order, where Earth's voice carried the weight of military supremacy. The memorial hall itself occupied what had once been a recreational area for alien delegates. Now it served a far more important purpose. Ambassador Park Min-ho's statue dominated the center of the space, carved from Earth marble and standing 3 meters tall. His right hand was extended in the gesture of peace he had offered before hegemony. Assassins cut him down, while his left held a scroll representing humanity's original diplomatic proposals that had been rejected with violence. Around the walls, etched in stone imported from every human world, were the names of the 37,000 humans who had died in the war that followed. Starfighter pilots who had rammed their damaged vessels into enemy cruisers, ship captains who had stayed behind to ensure their crews escaped, Marines who had boarded alien stations, knowing they wouldn't return. Each name represented a choice to sacrifice everything rather than allow injustice to stand unopposed. Captain Nam Sujin stood at attention beside the memorial wall, her dress uniform crisp, despite the scars that marked her face from the Battle of Vex Prime. As one of the few survivors of the carrier Soul's honor, she had personally delivered the surrender terms to the Cleth Confederation. After their hive fleet had been reduced to debris around their homeworld, her presence here served as a living reminder of humanity's determination to see justice done, regardless of the cost. The surviving alien delegates filled the amphitheater-style seating that had been arranged to face the memorial. Representatives from 43 species sat in chairs sized for their various anatomies, their body language ranging from resigned acceptance to barely contained fear. The Vex delegates kept their scales in muted patterns that indicated submission, while the remaining Cleth clicked their mandibles in rhythms that their translators rendered as nervous apologies. What made the scene most striking was who wasn't there. The hegemony delegation's seats remained empty, their species having chosen extinction over surrender when faced with humanity's ultimatum. 3 entire worlds had gone dark, rather than accept the terms that would have guaranteed their survival, leaving behind only automated distress beacons that played recordings of their final defiance into the empty void. Admiral Kim Dae-ho entered, the hall flanked by an honor guard of human Marines, their black uniforms bearing the insignia of units that had distinguished themselves in battles across the galaxy. Behind them walked the surviving members of humanity's diplomatic corps, men and women who had continued their work even as the war raged around them, ensuring that Earth's message of justice and accountability reached every corner of known space. General Jinwoo moved to the podium that had been positioned directly in front of Ambassador Park's statue. From this vantage point, he could see the faces of beings whose civilizations stretched back millions of years, all of them now forced to acknowledge that age and experience meant nothing when confronted by a species that refused to compromise on fundamental principles of right and wrong. "Let it be recorded in the annals of galactic history," Jinwoo began, his words automatically translated into dozens of alien languages and communication methods, that Ambassador Park Min-ho came to this very station offering peace, cooperation, and friendship. He extended his hand to species that had forgotten what it meant to welcome newcomers into their community. He spoke of mutual understanding and shared prosperity. The Tritari delegate, her golden skin now dulled with shame, shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Her species had been among those who had laughed loudest when the assassination was broadcast across the galaxy. Now her worlds were rebuilding their orbital defenses under human supervision. Their once proud fleet reduced to a handful of patrol vessels allowed to operate only within their own system. "You answered his gesture of peace with murder," Jinwoo continued, his voice carrying the weight of humanity's collective anger. "Not in the heat of battle, not in the confusion of conflict, but in cold blood, while he stood defenseless before your assembly. You sent a message that day about how your galaxy treats those who seek to join your community through diplomacy rather than conquest." Behind him, holographic displays activated to show scenes from the war that had followed. Human, Fleets emerging from hyperspace around alien worlds, starfighters weaving through enemy fire to strike at targets that would cripple entire civilizations without harming civilian populations. The systematic dismantling of military forces that had once been considered invincible, carried out by crews that treated each engagement as a moral necessity rather than a strategic objective. The war that followed was not our choice, the general stated, watching as mechanical delegates processed the visual data with artificial minds that calculated the mathematical precision of humanity's response. Every ship we built, every weapon we forged, every life we lost in battle was the direct result of your decision to answer diplomacy with assassination. We tried peace first, just as Ambassador Park promised in his final words. The new treaty that would emerge from this ceremony had been dictated by humanity with the same precision they had shown in warfare. No species could be denied representation through violence. Diplomatic missions would be protected by multinational forces. Most importantly, Earth's fleets would patrol the galaxy as guardians of civilized behavior, ensuring that never again would a peaceful envoy be murdered for the crime of offering friendship. Captain Lee Young-ho, commander of the Orbital Defense platform that now protected the Council Station, monitored the ceremony from his command center. His screens showed human warships positioned throughout the system, their crews maintaining the vigilance that had become humanity's trademark. The galaxy had learned to respect Earth's military might, but more importantly, they had learned to fear humanity's unwillingness to forgive those who chose violence over justice. As the ceremony concluded, with the signing of documents that would reshape galactic civilization, the memorial hall fell silent, except for the soft hum of air recyclers and the distant sound of ships moving through the station's docking facilities. Ambassador Park Min-ho's statue stood as a permanent reminder that sometimes the most powerful weapons in the universe were not energy cannons or particle beams, but the willingness of good people to stand up against injustice regardless of the cost. The galaxy had gained a new guardian, forged in the furnace of righteous anger and tempered by the understanding that true peace could only exist when those who would break it understood the consequences of their choices. Earth had transformed from a species seeking acceptance into the conscience of galactic civilization, ensuring that Park Min-ho's death would be the last time diplomacy was answered with murder. In the years that followed, beings throughout the galaxy would come to understand that humanity's greatest strength had never been their ships or their weapons. It was their absolute refusal to let injustice stand unopposed, even when standing against it meant facing the entire galaxy in battle. Ambassador Park's extended hand had been rejected, but his sacrifice had given birth to something far more powerful than any individual gesture of peace. The end.